What if the emptiness you've been trying to fill with relationship, success, and distraction was never meant to be filled by any of those things? I want you to sit with that for a second, because I know that question might have just landed somewhere uncomfortable. And that discomfort, that quiet ache that rises when the noise stops, that is exactly what this video is about. Here is what is strange about the world we're living in right now. We have more access to connection than any generation before us. We have apps designed by the brightest minds on the planet to keep us stimulated, entertained, and socially fed around the clock. We have therapy, self-help medication retreats, manifestation courses. We have more tools for happiness than any civilization that ever existed. And yet, rates of anxiety are climbing. Loneliness has been declared a public health epidemic, not just in struggling communities, but among people who, from the outside, appear to have everything. Studies from Harvard, from the WHO, from researchers across 3 continents are all pointing at the same unsettling pattern. The more comfortable life gets materially, the more people report feeling purposeless, empty, quietly desperate. Think about it this way. If more success was the answer, the most successful people would be the most at peace. But that is not what we're seeing. What we're seeing is that the people who arrive, who get the relationship, the career, the body, the lifestyle, often describe a strange grief when they get there. A kind of, is this it? That is not a failure of ambition. That is a signal. Now, most of the conversation around this gets filed under mental health, and I am not dismissing that. Mental health is real and it matters. But I think we've been misdiagnosing something. What if the anxiety, the restlessness, the chronic sense that something is missing, what if that is not a mental health crisis? What if it is a disconnection crisis? A specific kind of disconnection that no relationship, no achievement, and no amount of scrolling was ever built to fix. Because here is what I've been sitting with lately, and what genuinely changed how I see this. There is a growing body of neuroscience, serious peer-reviewed science, suggesting that your brain doesn't just tolerate spiritual connection. It was architecturally designed for it. That the longing you feel isn't weakness, isn't neediness, isn't something to be therapized away. It is quite literally your brain doing exactly what it was built to do. By the end of this video, you won't just have a feeling about that, you'll understand the mechanism. You'll see why every civilization in human history arrived at the same conclusion. And, more importantly, you'll know what to actually do with it. Let's get into it. There is a poem written in the 13th century by a Persian mystic named Rumi, and it opens with an image that the first time I encountered it, I couldn't stop thinking about. He describes a reed flute cut from its reed bed and crying. And Rumi says, that cry, that haunting sound the flute makes, that is not just music, that is longing. That is the sound of something separated from its origin, aching to return to where it came from. Now, I know that might sound like beautiful poetry and nothing more, but stay with me, because Rumi wasn't writing a love song. He was making a diagnosis. He was saying that the restlessness humans feel, that low hum of something is missing, that follows you even into your best moments, is not random. It is not dysfunction. It is the sound of a soul that knows it has been cut from something. Different traditions have different names for it in Arabic. The word is Fitra, the innate disposition every human being is born with, an internal compass oriented toward the divine. In Christian mysticism, Augustine put it so precisely it almost feels unfair. He wrote, "Our heart is restless until it rests in thee." Not as a theological argument, as an observation about human nature, as if to say, I've watched people, I've watched them chase, and they don't stop being restless until they find this one specific thing. And here is what I find genuinely remarkable about this. These weren't people who grew up in the same culture, reading the same books, influenced by the same teachers. Rumi was in Persia, Augustine was in North Africa. The Buddhist monks were in Southeast Asia. Indigenous wisdom traditions on every continent independently developed practices of transcendent connection, no cross-pollination, no shared literature. And they all arrived at the same conclusion. Think about what that means for a moment. When thousands of independent observers across thousands of years with no contact with each other all report the same phenomenon at some point that stops being coincidence and starts being data. This is what I want you to understand. These weren't primitive people projecting their fears onto the cosmos because they didn't have science yet. Many of these were the most rigorously self-aware human beings who ever lived. They spent decades in silence, studying the interior landscape of human experience, the way a scientist studies a specimen. And their unanimous finding was this: humans are structurally incomplete without vertical connection. Not broken, not weak, incomplete. The way a compass isn't broken when it points north. That is just what it was made to do. So when you feel that pull towards something greater than yourself, something beyond the horizontal plane of achievement and relationship and survival, I need you to hear this clearly. That is not you being irrational. That is you being exactly human. Now, I want to talk to the part of you that needs more than a poem, because maybe you heard Rumi and Augustine and something in you resonated. But there is another part of you, the skeptical modern show, me, the evidence part, that is quietly asking, but is any of this actually real, or is this just what humans tell themselves to cope? That is a fair question. And science has a genuinely surprising answer. A neuroscientist at the University of Pennsylvania named Andrew Newberg spent years doing something that had never really been done before. He put people inside brain scanners, Franciscan nuns in deep prayer, Tibetan monks in advanced meditation, and he watched what happened neurologically in real time. What he found stopped me when I first read about it. The brain didn't treat these spiritual experiences as imagination or wishful thinking. The prefrontal cortex, the region associated with focused attention and self-awareness, lit up with intense activity. The parietal lobe, which is responsible for your sense of where your body ends and the world begins, showed a measurable decrease in activity. That boundary, the one that tells you, I am separate, I am alone, I am just this body in this room, it softened and in its place. People reported an overwhelming sense of something meeting them. The brain wasn't generating a fantasy, it was registering contact. Then there is the default mode network, the DMN. This is the neural system that activates when your mind wanders, when you are ruminating about the past, anxious about the future, caught in that exhausting loop of self-referential thought. And here is what researchers discovered. During deep prayer, meditation, and genuine flow states, the DMN goes quiet. And almost universally, people describe the same thing in those moments, peace, meaning a feeling of being held by something larger than themselves. This isn't a belief system producing that experience. It is a measurable neurological shift. I remember reading about the reframing of Bowlby's attachment theory and genuinely having to put the book down for a moment. You probably know attachment theory as the framework explaining how our early bonds with parents shape our adult relationships, but researchers have been expanding that model. They're now arguing that humans carry what they call a spiritual attachment behavioral system, a separate innate drive that activates specifically under existential threat, when life gets too big, when grief arrives, when you are face to face with your own mortality in those moments. People don't just reach for other humans, they reach upward, across belief systems, almost instinctively. That is not religion, that is biology. And then there is the data that I think skeptics find hardest to dismiss. Harvard's study of adult development the longest-running study on human happiness ever conducted, along with multiple longitudinal studies across different populations, consistently found that people who maintain some form of transcendent practice show lower cortisol levels, stronger immune function, and faster psychological recovery after trauma. Not people who simply attended religious services out of habit, people who had genuine, felt connection to something beyond themselves. You don't have to believe in God to accept what this data is telling you. You just have to accept one thing. Your brain was designed to reach for something beyond itself, and when it can't find it, when that reach goes unanswered long enough, something in you starts to collapse quietly from the inside. That is not a spiritual opinion, that is neuroscience. So now we know the science, we know the ancient wisdom points the same direction. The question is, what do you actually do with this? Because information without application is just interesting. And I don't want this to be a video you found interesting. I want it to be one that actually changed something. So, here are 5 steps, not theories, moves you can make starting today. The first one is this. Stop treating spiritual hunger as a symptom to suppress most people. When they feel that restlessness, that low, persistent ache of something is missing, they immediately try to make it stop. They book a holiday, they start a new relationship, they download another app, they work harder, they eat, scroll, consume, distract, and I understand that impulse completely. Discomfort is uncomfortable. That is the whole point, but think about what you are actually doing when you suppress that signal. Imagine your car's warning light comes on, and instead of checking the engine, you put tape over the dashboard. The light is gone. The problem isn't your restlessness is not a malfunction, it is a message, and the first step toward real change is learning to read it, instead of silence it. Your longing is not a wound, it is a compass. Let it point. The second step is to separate religion from transcendence. These are not the same thing, and I say this with genuine care. Many people have had painful experiences with organized religion. I am not asking you to revisit that. But here is what concerns me. In walking away from religion, a lot of people quietly also abandoned the need that religion was trying to serve. They threw out the vertical connection along with the institution. Transcendence doesn't require a building or a doctrine. It lives in deep meditation, in standing at the edge of the ocean and feeling genuinely small, in acts of selfless service where nobody is watching and nobody is filming, in prayer that is honest and private and yours alone. Your job isn't to adopt someone else's language for this. Your job is to find your own, one that feels true rather than performed. The third step is what I call deliberate stillness, and this one is non-negotiable. Your brain cannot access transcendence in a reactive, overstimulated state. It is neurologically impossible. The default mode network cannot reset when you are constantly feeding it inputs, which means the gateway to everything we've been talking about today requires one thing first: silence. Real silence. Not a productivity hack, not a guided visualization designed to make you more focused at work. 10 minutes a day of simply being still and receptive. No agenda, no output, just listening. Every tradition in human history has had a version of this practice, and what they understood, that we've mostly forgotten, is that prayer at its deepest level is not a monologue. It is not a list of requests. It is an act of becoming quiet enough to receive. Step 4 is to build what I call meaning anchors into your week. These are small, deliberate rituals designed to connect you to something larger than your personal narrative. Writing gratitude not as an affirmation exercise, but as a genuine act of acknowledgement, recognizing that something beyond your own effort is operating in your life. Serving someone with no documentation, no post, no story, taking one day a week where you disconnect from technology, not as a wellness trend, but as a genuine act of sacred rest. These practices work neurologically. They manually trigger the default mode network reset we talked about earlier. They lower cortisol. They reduce what researchers call existential anxiety, that background hum of meaninglessness that modern life is absolutely saturated with. And the fifth step is the hardest one. Audit your substitutes. I want you to honestly look at what you are currently using to fill the vertical void. It might be relationships, constantly needing a partner to feel complete. It might be achievement, that relentless chase of the next milestone that always seems to move when you get close. It might be validation, substances, status, busyness. I am not here to shame any of it. These things aren't bad. They fail you not because they are broken, but because they are horizontal solutions to a vertical hunger. And here is the question I want to leave you sitting with before we close. If you removed your top 3 distractions, genuinely removed them, what would you be forced to confront? Because whatever that answer is, that is exactly where your work begins. I want to come back to where we started. That question I asked you at the very beginning. What if the emptiness you've been trying to fill with relationships, success, and distraction was never meant to be filled by any of those things? I hope that lands differently now because we've covered a lot of ground together today. Rumi's reed, Augustine's restlessness, brain scans from monks in meditation, Harvard's decades of data on what actually makes humans thrive, and what strikes me sitting with all of it is this. The emptiness was never a flaw in your design. It was the design. It was always pointing somewhere. You just weren't given a map that told you where. And I think that is the quiet tragedy of the modern world. Not that people are evil or lazy or spiritually indifferent, but that we inherited a cultural story that told us the answer was always horizontal, more achievement, more connection, more stimulation, more self-optimization. And when that story kept failing us, when we kept arriving at destinations that felt strangely empty, we concluded that something was wrong with us, that we were anxious by nature, broken by default, impossible to satisfy. But what if you were never broken? What if you were just homesick? Here is the reframe I want you to carry out of this video. Science and ancient wisdom are not in opposition. They never were. They are 2 different languages. One speaking in neurons and cortisol and attachment systems. The other speaking in parables and poems and prayer. But they are describing the exact same human reality. They are both pointing at the same thing. A being that was built with a hunger that the world alone cannot feed. Think about what it means to live inside that understanding, not as a burden, as a relief. You are not defective. You are not asking too much. You are not too sensitive or too needy or too idealistic. You are a human being doing precisely what human beings were designed to do. Reaching for something real, something lasting, something that does not disappoint. And here is the question I want to leave you with, not to answer right now, just to sit with. What if the most radical countercultural thing you could do in the modern world, in a world that is louder and faster and more distracting than it has ever been, is to stop running from the one connection that was built into you before you were even born, not performing spirituality, not adopting someone else's answers, just stopping, getting quiet, and for the first time in a long time, letting yourself actually feel the reach. That is where this begins, not in a grand transformation, in a single moment of honesty with yourself. I'd love to know where you are with this right now. Leave one word in the comments, just one, that describes what you've been searching for. Don't overthink it. Whatever comes up first, write it down. Let's see what comes up, because I have a feeling we're all reaching for something closer than we think.